The sky was gray that morning, as if the world itself paused to listen. The streetlights flickered as a sleek black car slid to a stop. Inside, a man watched the city wake up. Every breath shallow, every thought heavy with a secret he had carried for years. Somewhere above him, in towers of steel and glass, others were already awake. They lingered behind tinted windows and encrypted screens. They moved in shadows no one else saw. If you had stood on that sidewalk with him, you might have wondered if the city was alive. Or if it was just another machine waiting to be switched on. He stepped out of the car. The sound of his shoes echoed against concrete. A woman on her way to work glanced at him briefly. Then looked away. Nothing unusual. Nothing worth noticing. But something in his posture suggested he was waiting for something. Or someone. He breathed in. The weight of the moment pressed in like water against lungs. Then he walked. Down the street, past rows of shops that had welcomed morning light for decades. Past a newsstand where headlines shouted about markets and interest rates as if those words were ordinary. They were not ordinary. Not to him. Behind those words lay currents in the world's bloodstream. Forces that pulsed unseen beneath daily life. Inside a cafe, early customers sipped coffee, unaware they were part of the story too. A barista wiped a counter. Her eyes half shut with sleep. Her world and his were about to intersect. Though she had no idea. She saw only a customer. He saw patterns. 2 weeks earlier, he had sat in this same seat, staring at the street through rain-streaked glass. He had watched life move on around him, oblivious to an invisible architecture shaping every decision they made. He had seen it in spreadsheets and whispered conversations in sealed rooms. It was a system built on debt. Massive, intricate, nearly impossible to see unless you knew where to look. Debt, a word so ordinary it faded into background noise. But what if debt was not just borrowed money? What if it was a tool? A blade so finely tuned that it could shape nations without a single drop of blood spilled? What if the richest among us had mastered its language while the rest of the world never learned to speak it? He closed his eyes for a moment. He heard the hum of the cafe's music, a soft rhythm beneath the clink of mugs. Outside, a digital billboard flickered, advertising dreams in binary code. Work harder. Invest smarter. Become your own boss. All whispers feeding hope, quietly tethering people to the very system that thrived on their aspiration. He opened his eyes again, locking them on nothing and everything. This was where the story began. She placed a latte before him, steam curling like smoke from a forgotten fire. He thanked her without looking up. His thoughts were elsewhere, far beyond foam and milk. He felt something stirring at the edges of his consciousness. Like a memory buried deep beneath layers of certainty and doubt. A question that refused to be silenced. How had we come to this? A few seats down, a young man scrolled on his phone. Fingers dancing over headlines that screamed about market confidence, inflation fears, interest rate decisions. These phrases floated like distant thunder, evoking anxiety without clarity. And that was no accident. Words like these moved the masses, directing attention while masking the true levers in play. Because the real levers were not on screens. They were in rooms shrouded from public view. In deals whispered across tables. Millions turned into billions. Nations learned to kneel before numbers on a balance sheet. People believed in currency, in credit, in loans, in mortgages. Believed in a system that asked for trust while concealing its architects. He took a sip, the warmth spreading slowly through his chest. He remembered something his mentor once told him. Money is trust distilled into numbers. If that was true, then debt was fear crystallized into obligation. The door chimed. Someone else entered. A man in a tailored suit. A briefcase swinging at his side like a conductor's baton. He didn't see the camera in the corner, blending into the decor. Unnoticed by most. But it was there. Always there. A silent chronicler of ordinary moments that held extraordinary truths. Out here, on the surface, life went on. Bills were paid. Coffee was drunk. Conversations about weather and weekend plans drifted through the air. But beneath that everyday facade, something else was humming. A mechanism so refined that only those with a lifetime of study could recognize its subtle vibrations. He finished his drink and stood. Outside, the sky had shifted. Clouds moving like armies in formation. He walked again, toward the heart of the city. The streets were alive with purpose. A cyclist sped by, weaving through taxis and buses. A child on the sidewalk watched pigeons scatter and reform like shifting thoughts in a restless mind. There was a moment, just a flash, where he wondered if any of this was real. Not the buildings or the people, but the narratives we told ourselves about why the world worked the way it did. We said growth. We said markets. We said opportunity. But what if those words were just smoke, cast to conceal the furnace beneath? He reached a building that rose like a monolith. Its doors guarded more by bureaucracy than by security guards. Inside, elevators hummed with quiet urgency. He pressed a button. The doors closed. In that small metal box, between floors, he felt the tension coil tighter. On the top floor, behind thick doors, decisions were made that rippled across continents. Conversations here did not mention the barista or the cyclist or the child. They spoke in spreadsheets and projections and leverage ratios. A language that shaped reality without ever appearing in the textbooks people read. A woman approached him, her expression unreadable. They did not shake hands. There was no need. Eyes spoke more truth than any gesture. She led him down a corridor, past windows that offered sweeping views of the city. Below, life moved. Oblivious. "Are you certain?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. There was a stillness in his mind, like a pendulum paused at its apex. Then he spoke, slow and deliberate. "People think debt is a burden. Something to be avoided. A trap. But it's more than that. It's a thread woven into the fabric of society. And when you pull on that thread, you see how tightly we are all connected." She didn't blink. She had heard variations of these words before. But hearing them from him gave them a different weight. They walked into a room where screens displayed numbers in endless columns. Each figure seemed insignificant on its own. Yet together, they formed a tapestry of power. This was where debt was not a burden but a weapon. Not a liability but a lever. He remembered an economist's voice from years ago. A lecture that refused to leave him. Debt liberates capital from the constraints of time. At first, that sounded noble. Capital freed to grow, to innovate, to build. But then he realized liberation for whom? Because if debt liberated capital, it also entangled the rest in chains unseen. Every loan taken, every mortgage signed, every national bond issued, a thread in a web. And the web was vast, stretching across borders and generations. The woman gestured to a screen. "Look here," she said. "This model predicts economic shifts based on leverage ratios and fiscal flows." Numbers danced across the display. A river of data that seemed hypnotic. He studied it, not as an expert, but as someone seeking meaning beneath abstraction. Patterns began to emerge. A slight shift in one parameter rippled outward, affecting markets, influencing policy, shaping public perception. It was like watching pebbles drop into a still pond. But people only see the surface, he said. They see headlines about deficits or growth or recession. They never see the calculus underneath. They never see how power flows through these equations. She nodded, though her eyes betrayed nothing. Around them, analysts typed furiously, eyes glued to screens. They were the architects of invisible architecture, building and reconfiguring debt like an infinite puzzle. He thought back to a story he once heard about a village that fell into ruin. Not because of war or famine but because the moneylender arrived. He remembered the way the villagers had welcomed him at first, offering grain for loans, believing in goodwill. But season after season, the weight of obligation grew heavier. The soil became harder to till. Children left in search of work elsewhere. And the moneylender, he left only with paper. The promises of repayment. While the village crumbled, that story had always felt distant. A parable about ancient times. But now, in this room, he realized it was not ancient. It was everywhere. Because debt is not an abstraction. It lives in homes, in nations, in dreams of prosperity. It is written into the very idea of progress. We borrow to build. We borrow to learn. We borrow to live. And in borrowing, we surrender a piece of ourselves to a system that never sleeps. Outside, the city thrummed with life. Cars honking, people rushing, birds flapping against gusty winds. None of them knew what was happening here. None of them sensed the quiet calculus that shaped their fate. They believed in markets, in opportunity, in the promise of tomorrow. They believed in stories. And stories are powerful. They give shape to reality. We tell ourselves that debt is a tool, that credit is progress, that interest is a price worth paying for growth. But what if these narratives were crafted by those who understood how to wield debt not as a tool but as a form of control? He turned back to the screens. Somewhere deep in the code, a pattern unfolded. A geometric choreography of supply and demand, risk and reward, leverage and obligation. It was beautiful in a harsh sort of way. A tapestry of human ambition woven with numbers. The woman watched him, her gaze inscrutable. He knew she was weighing his thoughts, measuring the depth of his insight. She had spent years here, mastering systems most people never see. Yet even she seemed struck by how he perceived it, not just as data, but as human consequence. A silence stretched between them, thick and laden with unspoken truths. Outside, distant sirens wail. A reminder that life beyond these walls carried on, indifferent to the architectures of power. He spoke again, voice steady but quiet, as if sharing something too profound for loud proclamation. Debt creates dependency. It binds us not just financially but psychologically. People work not for fulfillment but to repay obligations they barely understand. Nations legislate in fear of markets. Individuals sacrifice joy for security. All because we believe in a system that promises stability but delivers control. She did not respond immediately. Instead, she turned to one of the analysts, whispering a directive. Numbers shifted on the screen. Graphs realigned. A curve flattened, then spiked. It was like watching tectonic plates under invisible force. He stepped back, feeling a tension coil tighter in his middle. The air felt heavier now, as if every breath drew in both revelation and burden. He thought of the barista, of the young man with the phone, of the child watching pigeons. He thought of people everywhere, living and working and hoping, unaware of the currents shaping their world. And then he understood something both terrifying and deeply human. This was not just about power. It was about belief. Systems survive because we choose to trust them. Money works because we agree it does. Debt functions because we accept obligation as normal. But what if belief could be reshaped? What if understanding dismantled illusion? The woman stepped closer, her expression softer now. You see beyond the numbers, she said. That is rare. He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. Rare, indeed. Most never questioned. Most never looked beneath surface noise. Most simply lived, unaware their lives were part of a grander design. A clock ticked somewhere, its sound distant yet steady. It measured time but not consequence. Outside, the city moved in seasons. People married, divorced, celebrated, mourned. All of it woven into a tapestry shaped subtly by debt's unseen hands. He left the room eventually, walking back down the corridor. The sunlight outside felt harsh after the dim glow of screens. He breathed deeply, grounding himself. Life continued, honest, raw, unpredictable. In a park nearby, children played. Their laughter was a melody unburdened by calculus. An elderly man sat feeding birds, his eyes soft with memory. A couple walked hand in hand, talking quietly. Here, debt was not numbers on a screen. It was mortgages and rent and student loans. It was the anxiety of rent due dates and credit card statements. It was how ordinary life collides with invisible systems. He watched them for a long time, feeling a strange blend of hope and sorrow. Hope because life persisted in its simple beauty. Sorrow because most would never see the architecture shaping their world. And yet, in that sorrow was revelation. People don't need to be powerless to systems. They need to see them. To understand them. To recognize that debt, like fire, can warm or burn. He walked away from the park, each step lighter than before. The sky had cleared now, revealing sun and possibility. But beneath that brightness lay shadows. Patterns waiting to be understood. And somewhere in the heartbeat of the world, debt continued its silent dance. Binding and shaping, waiting for the next person to open their eyes.